Everyone said she was insane. When the divorce papers gave her a choice between $50,000 cash or her ex-husband's abandoned diner on Route 66, her own sister called her an idiot for choosing the worthless restaurant. "That rat-infested dump hasn't served a meal in 5 years," they laughed. But when FBI agents surrounded the building 6 weeks later and excavated the basement, they didn't find rats. They found a hidden vault containing evidence from the biggest unsolved heist in American history, along with gold bars worth $180 million. The woman everyone mocked for taking a worthless diner was about to become one of the richest people in the state, while those who laughed at her would soon be answering some very uncomfortable questions about what they really knew. This is the shocking true story of how one woman's stupid decision revealed a 40-year-old secret that changed everything. The lunch rush at Riverside Family Restaurant was always brutal, but Saturdays were the worst. Grace Mitchell wiped sweat from her forehead as she juggled 4 plates of the daily special, weaving between tables packed with hungry customers. Her feet screamed in protest. She'd been on them since 4:30 that morning, and it was now past 2 p.m. "Table 12 needs more coffee," her manager Barry called out, barely looking up from his phone. Grace nodded, adding it to her mental list of tasks. She'd worked at this chain restaurant for 3 years now, ever since the divorce had left her scrambling to support herself and her teenage son, Tyler. The bell above the door chimed, and Grace glanced up to see her ex-husband Roger walk in with his new wife, Christina. They were laughing about something, Roger's hand resting possessively on Christina's designer purse. Grace's stomach tightened. Of all the restaurants in Riverside, why did they have to come here? She ducked into the kitchen, hoping Marlene, another waitress, would take their table. But Barry appeared at her elbow. "Grace, you've got a 2-top at table 15. Could Marlene?" "Marlene's on break. Table 15, now." Grace took a deep breath and approached their table, order pad in hand. Roger's expression shifted from contentment to discomfort when he saw her. Christina, however, smiled with the kind of false sweetness that made Grace's teeth hurt. "Grace." "What a surprise," Christina said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "How are you managing?" "I'm fine. What can I get you started with today?" Roger cleared his throat. "Just coffee for me." "Christina." "I'll have the Caesar salad, no croutons, dressing on the side, and a sparkling water with lemon." She looked Grace up and down. "You look tired, hon. These long shifts must be so hard at your age." Grace was 42, only 3 years older than Christina, but she held her tongue. "I'll get that right in." As she walked away, she heard Christina whisper, "I still can't believe she turned down the settlement money. Pride is so expensive when you're poor." The settlement money had been Roger's attempt to quietly make her go away after she'd discovered his affair with Christina, his dental practice's receptionist. $50,000 to sign papers giving up any claim to his business or their shared assets. Grace had refused on principle, choosing instead to take the only thing the court said was rightfully hers, an abandoned diner Roger had inherited from his uncle but never bothered to do anything with. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Tyler, "Mom, can you pick me up after practice? Jake's mom can't give me a ride." She quickly typed back, "Working till 6. Can you wait at school?" "I guess." Another vibration. This time her sister Lauren saw Roger's Mercedes at your restaurant. "You okay?" Grace didn't have time to respond. Orders were backing up, and Barry was giving her the stink eye from across the dining room. For the next hour, she forced herself to focus on work, but it was impossible to ignore Roger and Christina's presence. They lingered over their meal, Christina's laugh carrying across the restaurant every few minutes. When Grace brought their check, Roger couldn't meet her eyes as he handed over his platinum credit card, the same one they'd shared during their marriage. "Keep the change," he muttered, leaving a standard 15% tip. After they left, Grace slumped against the server station, exhausted. Marlene, back from her break, patted her shoulder. "You okay, honey?" "Just tired." "That was your ex, wasn't it?" "The dentist." Grace nodded. "And you gave up money for some broken-down diner?" "Girl, "I love you," but that was stupid. It was a refrain Grace had heard countless times over the past 6 months. From her sister, her mother, her friends, even her own son. Everyone thought she was crazy for taking the diner instead of the cash. The Blue Moon Diner on Old Route 66 had been closed for 5 years, slowly rotting away on a stretch of highway that nobody used anymore since the interstate was built. But something about taking Roger's money had felt like accepting defeat, like admitting that 15 years of marriage meant nothing more than a check. The diner, worthless as it was, had been the only thing that felt like a real asset, something concrete. Roger had been so eager to get rid of it, practically begging her to take the money instead. Maybe it was stupid, Grace admitted to Marlene. But it's mine. The rest of her shift dragged by. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, Grace's feet were numb and her lower back ached. She grabbed her purse from her locker, said goodbye to the evening shift crew, and headed to her 12-year-old Honda Civic in the employee parking lot. Tyler was waiting outside the school gym, his basketball gear slung over his shoulder. At 16, he was already taller than her, with Roger's square jaw but her green eyes. He slid into the passenger seat without a word. "Good practice?" she asked. It was fine. They drove in silence for a few minutes before Tyler spoke again. "Dad came by practice today." Grace's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Oh. He said he and Christina are going to Cabo next week. Asked if I wanted to come." "That sounds nice." I said no. Tyler stared out the window. He also asked about the diner again. Said he knows some developers who might be interested in the land. Tyler. "Mom, I get it, okay. You don't want his money. But that diner is literally falling apart. We could use the cash." Grace pulled into their apartment complex, a far cry from the 4-bedroom colonial they'd lived in during her marriage. "The diner was your great-uncle's. It means something." "To who?" "Not to Dad. Uncle Pete's been dead for years." "To me," Grace said quietly. "It means something to me." Grace's alarm buzzed at 4 a.m. Monday morning, just like every weekday. She rolled out of bed, joints protesting, and shuffled to the bathroom. The face staring back from the mirror looked every one of her 42 years, dark circles under green eyes, lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before the divorce. Tyler was still asleep when she left for her shift. She'd left him lunch money on the counter and a note reminding him about his history test. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the ancient refrigerator and the drip of the kitchen faucet she kept meaning to fix. The drive to Riverside Family Restaurant took 15 minutes through empty streets. Grace liked this time of morning, before the world woke up and demanded things from her. She could almost pretend she was driving somewhere else, maybe to her own restaurant where she'd be the one making decisions instead of taking orders. Barry was already there when she arrived, doing inventory in the walk-in cooler. "You're late," he said without looking at his watch. She was actually 2 minutes early, but arguing with Barry was pointless. "Sorry. Lauren called in sick. I need you to cover her section too." Grace's heart sank. Lauren wasn't her sister, just another waitress with the same name, but covering her section meant twice the work for the same hourly wage. "I have to leave at 3 today. I have an appointment." Barry finally looked at her. "What kind of appointment?" "Personal." "Cancel it. I need you till close." "Barry, I can't." "Then maybe this job isn't working out for you." His tone was casual, but the threat was clear. Grace had seen him fire servers for less. "I'll stay," she heard herself say. The morning flew by in a blur of coffee refills and breakfast orders. By 10, her feet were already aching. She sneaked a moment to text Tyler about staying late, then dove back into the chaos. During a brief lull, she overheard 2 customers talking at the counter. "Did you see they're finally tearing down that old diner on Route 66? The Blue Moon or whatever?" Grace froze, coffee pot in hand. "About time," the other men replied. "That eyesore's been empty for years. City Council voted to condemn it last week." "Condemn it?" Grace interrupted, forgetting herself. What do you mean? The men looked at her with mild surprise. Yeah, it's a safety hazard apparently. They're giving the owner 30 days to bring it up to code or they'll demolish it. Grace's hands shook as she poured their coffee. Condemned. She hadn't received any notice. But then again, she'd been avoiding the diner, telling herself she'd deal with it when she had more time, more money, more energy. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, her actual sister, Rebecca. Family dinner Sunday. Mom's house. 5 p.m. Don't even think about skipping. Grace groaned internally. Family dinners meant listening to her mother Patricia discuss Rebecca's successful real estate career and her brother David's promotion at the bank. It meant deflecting questions about when she'd get back on her feet and stop being so stubborn about Roger's money. The lunch rush hit like a tsunami. Grace moved on autopilot, smile plastered on her face while her mind raced. 30 days to bring the diner up to code. How much would that cost? She had maybe $2,000 in savings, and that was earmarked for Tyler's basketball camp. Around 2 o'clock, her phone rang. She ignored it. It rang again. And again. Grace. Barry barked. Either answer it or turn it off. She ducked into the break room. Unknown number. Hello. Ms. Mitchell. This is Alan Crawford from Crawford Development. I understand you own the Blue Moon Diner property. Yes. I'd like to discuss purchasing it from you. I'm prepared to make a very generous offer. I'm not interested in selling. There was a pause. Ms. Mitchell, I'm aware the city has condemned the building. My offer would save you the demolition costs and put money in your pocket. $60,000. More than Roger's settlement. Grace closed her eyes. I said I'm not interested. $70,000. That's my final offer. No thank you. Ms. Mitchell, in 30 days that property will be worthless. The city will tear it down and bill you for the demolition. You'll be in debt instead of ahead. I'll figure it out. Crawford's tone turned cold. I think you're making a mistake. I know your ex-husband. Roger mentioned you were struggling. This could solve a lot of problems for you. Roger sent you. He's concerned about your well-being. And your sons. Grace hung up, hands shaking with anger. Of course Roger was behind this. He'd probably known about the condemnation before she did, had his developer friends ready to swoop in and steal the property for pennies on the dollar. She splashed water on her face and returned to the dining room. The rest of her shift passed in a haze of exhaustion and worry. By the time she finally left at 9 p.m., she could barely stand. Tyler was asleep on the couch when she got home, homework spread across the coffee table. She covered him with a blanket and collapsed into her own bed, still wearing her uniform. Her last thought before sleep took her was of the Blue Moon Diner, sitting empty on that lonely stretch of road, waiting to be torn down. Just like everything else in her life lately, falling apart piece by piece while everyone watched and shook their heads at her stubbornness. Sunday arrived too quickly. Grace stood outside her childhood home, holding a store-bought pie and trying to summon the energy to face her family. Tyler had begged off, claiming he had a study group, but Grace knew he just couldn't stand another evening of his grandmother's passive-aggressive comments about their situation. Grace. Finally. Her mother Patricia opened the door, perfectly coiffed as always. At 70, she still dressed like she was heading to a country club luncheon. We were starting to wonder if you'd gotten lost. Though I suppose you know these streets well enough, considering you're back to living in a rental. Hi, Mom. The house smelled like pot roast and disappointment. Rebecca was already there, helping set the table with her husband Charles. David lounged in their father's old recliner, scrolling through his phone while his wife Emma supervised their twins in the living room. Grace. Rebecca hugged her, then pulled back to study her face. You look exhausted. Still working those awful hours. It pays the bills. Speaking of bills, David said without looking up, I heard about the diner. Condemned, huh? Guess that investment really paid off. David, Emma warned. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. She gave up $50,000 for a building that's about to be demolished. It's like watching someone set money on fire. Grace set the pie on the counter harder than necessary. It's handled. Handled how? Patricia asked, bringing salad to the table. Do you have the money to bring it up to code? Because I certainly don't have anything to lend you, not after helping with your apartment deposit. I didn't ask for a loan, Mom. No, you never ask for help. Too proud. Just like your father. They sat down to dinner, Grace strategically placing herself as far from David as possible. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of silverware on plates. So, Rebecca said, clearly trying to lighten the mood, Charles and I have some news. We're opening a second office in Riverside Heights. That's wonderful, dear, Patricia beamed. Such an accomplishment. You know, Grace, Rebecca's agency is hiring. You could make much more than waitressing. I have a job, Mom. Serving pancakes to truckers isn't a career, Grace. You have a degree, for heaven's sake. In art history, David snorted. Real useful. At least I finished college, Grace shot back. David had dropped out junior year to day trade cryptocurrency and had lost everything before their parents bailed him out. Children, please, Patricia sighed dramatically. I just worry about you, Grace. And Tyler. A boy needs stability. Roger may have his faults, but at least he provides for his family. His new family, Grace corrected. Well, whose fault is that? The words hung in the air like a slap. Grace stared at her mother. Excuse me. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. I'm not saying the affair was right, but men have needs. If you'd paid more attention to your appearance, maybe been more supportive of his career instead of always talking about opening your own restaurant. Grace stood up so fast her chair scraped against the hardwood. I need some air. She walked out the back door before anyone could stop her, hands trembling. The yard looked exactly as it had when she was young, same rose bushes, same garden gnomes. She'd gotten married in this backyard, 20 years ago. Roger had seemed so charming then, so full of promises. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Mitchell. This is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates law firm. I'm calling about your property on Route 66-inch. If this is about selling. No, ma'am. I'm actually calling about your late uncle-in-law, Peter Walsh. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks. There are some documents regarding the diner that require your attention. Documents. Yes. Mr. Walsh left very specific instructions about the property. Could you come by my office tomorrow? It's rather urgent, given the condemnation notice. Grace frowned. Roger handled all of Uncle Pete's estate matters. He said there was nothing but the diner itself. There was a pause. Ms. Mitchell, did your ex-husband have power of attorney over Mr. Walsh's estate? I don't know. He handled everything. Pete was his uncle. I see. Well, according to my records, the diner was left specifically to you, not to your ex-husband. And there are additional provisions that were never executed. Can you come by tomorrow at 10? I have to work. Ms. Mitchell, I really must insist. What I have to share could significantly impact your current situation. Grace looked back at the house, where her family was probably dissecting her life choices over dessert. Okay. 10 o'clock. After hanging up, she stood in the yard a moment longer. The stars were coming out, faint above the suburban light pollution. She thought about Uncle Pete, a quiet man who'd run the Blue Moon for 40 years before his heart gave out. He'd always been kind to her, always asked about her dreams of opening her own place. The back door opened. Rebecca stepped out, holding Grace's purse. You okay? I'm fine. Mom didn't mean it. You know how she gets. Grace took her purse. She meant every word. Maybe, but she's wrong. The affair wasn't your fault. They stood together in the gathering darkness. Finally, Rebecca asked, "What are you going to do about the diner?" "I don't know yet. You could still take Roger's money. I know he'd pay more now, just to make the problem go away. It's not his problem. It's mine." Rebecca hugged her. Just don't let pride cost you everything, okay? As Grace drove home, she thought about pride and cost and what everything really meant. Tomorrow she'd meet with this lawyer and find out what Uncle Pete had really left behind. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just more problems. But maybe, just maybe, it was the answer she'd been looking for. Grace sat in the waiting room of Morrison and Associates, acutely aware of her discount store blazer among the leather and mahogany. She'd called in sick to work, knowing Barry would be furious but unable to care. Something about the lawyer's urgency had shaken her. "Ms. Mitchell." A silver-haired man in an expensive suit appeared. "I'm James Morrison. Thank you for coming." His office overlooked downtown Riverside, all gleaming glass and success. Grace perched on the edge of a leather chair while Morrison retrieved a thick folder from his safe. "First, I must apologize," he began. "I should have contacted you sooner, but your ex-husband made that difficult. He led me to believe you'd been properly informed of your inheritance. Roger handled everything. He said Pete left him the diner and he was giving it to me in the divorce." Morrison's expression darkened. "That's not accurate. Peter Walsh left the diner directly to you, Ms. Mitchell. His will was very specific." He handed her a document. Grace's name was clearly stated as the sole beneficiary of the Blue Moon Diner and all its contents. "But why me? I was just his nephew's wife. Peter and I were friends for 40 years, Morrison said. He spoke of you often. Said you were the only one in the family who understood what the diner meant. He knew Roger saw it as worthless real estate, but you saw its potential." Grace's throat tightened. "He barely knew me. He knew enough. He also knew Roger was," Morrison chose his words carefully, "not someone he wanted controlling his legacy. Roger lied to me." "Yes. And there's more." Morrison pulled out another set of papers. The diner came with specific conditions. Peter established a restoration fund, $50,000 designated specifically for bringing the building up to code. The money's been sitting in escrow for 5 years. Grace stared at the papers. 50,000. But Roger said Pete died broke. Another lie, I'm afraid. Peter also left detailed renovation plans, historical landmark applications, and, Morrison smiled slightly, some rather interesting notes about the building's history. He handed her a worn journal. Pete's spidery handwriting filled the pages. According to Peter's research, the Blue Moon has quite a past. Built in 1952, it was a regular stop for some notable figures. Politicians, celebrities, even some organized crime figures during the 60s. Peter believed there were still artifacts hidden in the building. Hidden. He was never able to prove it, but he spent years researching. Said the original owner, Vincent Torino, was connected to the Chicago outfit. When Torino disappeared in 1978, the diner was sold to pay debts. Peter bought it in 1980 and ran it honestly, but he always believed Torino left something behind. Grace flipped through the journal, seeing sketches of the diner's layout, notes about hollow walls and suspicious floor plans. This sounds like a conspiracy theory. Perhaps. But Peter was not a fanciful man. He was a retired engineer, very methodical. If he believed something was there, Morrison shrugged. In any case, the restoration fund is real and available immediately. I can have the check cut today. What's the catch? No catch. Just conditions. The money must be used for the diner. And you must take possession within 30 days, which, given the condemnation notice, means immediately. Grace's mind raced. $50,000 would more than cover bringing the building to code. She could save the diner, maybe even start the renovation she'd dreamed about. But why didn't Roger tell me about this? Morrison's expression was carefully neutral. I suspect because he'd already made arrangements to sell the property once it was condemned. If you didn't know about the restoration fund, you'd have no choice but to let it go. Crawford Development, Grace said. He called me last week. Alan Crawford is your ex-husband's golf partner. They've been planning this for months. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Roger hadn't just cheated on her with Christina, he'd been systematically stealing from her even after the divorce. What do I need to do? Sign these papers accepting the full inheritance. I'll release the funds immediately. Then I suggest you contact a contractor today. You have 28 days to pass inspection. Grace signed where Morrison indicated, hand steady despite the magnitude of what was happening. One more thing, Morrison said, handing her a ring of old keys. These were Peter's. He was very specific that you should have them. Said you'd know what to do with them when the time came. The keys were heavy, old-fashioned brass and iron. One looked like it might fit the diner's front door, but the others were mysteries. I don't understand. Neither did I. But Peter said, and I quote, Grace has the eye for hidden things. She sees what others miss. Do you know what he meant? Grace thought about her art history degree, the one her family mocked. She'd specialized in authentication, learning to spot forgeries and hidden details in paintings. Pete had asked her about it once at a family barbecue, seeming genuinely interested in her studies. Maybe, she said softly. Morrison stood, extending his hand. The check will be ready this afternoon. And Ms. Mitchell. Peter specifically instructed me to tell you this, the Blue Moon's best stories are yet to be told, whatever that means. Grace left the office in a daze. $50,000. The diner was really hers. And somewhere in that crumbling building, Uncle Pete believed there were secrets waiting to be found. She sat in her car and called Barry. I quit, she said when he answered. What? Grace, you can't just. I'm giving my 2 weeks' notice, effective immediately. Mail my last check. She hung up before he could respond, feeling lighter than she had in years. Then she dialed another number. Tyler. How do you feel about helping me renovate a diner? Grace stood in front of the Blue Moon Diner, keys heavy in her hand. In the afternoon sunlight, the building looked even worse than she remembered. Paint peeled from the walls like diseased skin, windows were boarded with plywood covered in graffiti, and weeds pushed through cracks in the parking lot. Tyler stood beside her, skeptical. Mom, this place is a dump. It needs work, Grace admitted, unlocking the padlock on the front door. But it's our dump. The door groaned open, releasing the smell of mildew and decay. Grace flipped the light switch, nothing. Of course the power had been shut off. Using her phone's flashlight, they navigated inside. The diner was frozen in time, like a photograph from the past. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, their surfaces cracked and faded. A long counter with swivel stools faced the kitchen pass-through. Black and white checkered linoleum curled at the edges. This is actually kind of cool, Tyler admitted, running his hand along the counter. Very retro. Grace smiled. Your great-uncle Pete kept it original. Said people came for the nostalgia as much as the food. They spent the next hour exploring. The kitchen equipment was outdated but surprisingly intact. The storage room held boxes of old receipts, menus, and photographs of the diner in its heyday. Grace pocketed a few pictures, including one of Pete standing proudly behind the counter. Mom, check this out, Tyler had found a door marked private near the back. Grace tried Uncle Pete's keys until one turned. The door opened to reveal stairs leading down to a basement. Their phone lights barely penetrated the darkness below. Maybe we should wait until we have proper lights, Grace suggested, but Tyler was already heading down. The basement was larger than expected, with concrete walls and a musty smell. Boxes and old furniture created a maze of shadows. Tyler's light caught something metallic in the corner. "Is that a safe?" It was, an enormous vintage safe built into the wall, its dial lock covered in dust. Grace tried to turn it, but it was frozen with age. "We'll need to get that looked at," she said, though her pulse quickened. What had Pete known? Her phone rang, startling them both. Roger's name appeared on screen. "What?" she answered, not bothering with pleasantries. "Grace, we need to talk. I heard you visited Morrison." "You mean the lawyer you told me didn't exist? When you said you'd handled everything?" "It's complicated. You lied to me, Roger. You stole from me. I was trying to protect you." His voice rose. "That diner is a money pit. Even with Pete's fund, you'll go broke trying to fix it up. That's my choice to make." "Is it? What about Tyler? You're going to drag him down with your ridiculous restaurant fantasy. Don't you dare." "I'm filing for full custody," the words hung between them like a weapon. "You quit your job to chase some pipe dream with a condemned building. No judge will think that's stable parenting." Grace's hand shook. "You wouldn't. I tried to help you, Grace. The Crawford deal would have set you up. But you're too stubborn to see sense. I won't let you ruin Tyler's future." He hung up. Grace stood in the darkness, phone gripped tight. "Mom." Tyler's voice was small. "He can't really take me away, can he?" "No, baby. He can't," but her voice wavered. They left the basement and locked up the diner. As they drove home, Grace's mind raced. She needed to move fast, get contractors, start renovations, prove she could make this work. The next morning, she met with 3 contractors. The first 2 took one look and shook their heads. The third, a gruff man named Bill Hansen, actually went through the building with her. "It's salvageable," he said finally. "But it won't be cheap or quick. Even with 50,000, you're looking at doing a lot yourself." "I can work." Bill studied her. "You ever do construction?" "I can learn." He named a price that would eat most of the restoration fund just for basic code compliance, electrical, plumbing, structural repairs. Nothing cosmetic. "Do it," Grace said. That afternoon, Rebecca called. "Mom told me about Roger's custody threat. Grace, maybe you should reconsider." "Whose side are you on?" "Yours. Always yours. But be realistic. You can fight Roger on the diner or on custody, but probably not both. He has money for lawyers." Grace hung up. Within an hour, her mother called with similar concerns. Then David texted, offering to broker a deal with Crawford Development for more money. By evening, Grace felt under siege. Everyone had an opinion about what she should do, and none of them involved keeping the diner. She was heating leftover pasta when someone knocked. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in her 60s, silver hair neat, wearing a simple coat. "Can I help you?" "Grace Mitchell." "I'm Helen Torino." Vincent Torino was my father. Grace's breath caught. The original owner's daughter. She opened the door. "I heard someone was finally fixing up the old place," Helen said. "I was hoping we could talk." Over tea, Helen shared stories of the Blue Moon's golden age. Her father had run it from 1952 to 1978, when he'd vanished one night, leaving debts and questions. "The police said he ran to avoid prosecution, but I never believed it," Helen said. "My father loved that diner. He would never have abandoned it by choice." "What do you think happened?" Helen hesitated. "My father had partners. Silent investors who weren't legitimate businessmen. I think something went wrong. Uncle Pete thought your father might have hidden something in the building." Helen's eyes sharpened. "Pete was a good man. He took care of the place. Did he ever find anything?" "I don't think so. But he left notes, theories. May I see them? Grace fetched Pete's journal. Helen studied it intently, occasionally nodding. This matches things my father said, she murmured. About the basement especially. He used to joke that the Blue Moon had more secrets than recipes. She handed the journal back. Be careful, Grace. If my father did hide something, others might know. Others who've been waiting for someone naive enough to start looking. Grace spent the next 2 weeks in a frenzy of activity. Days were devoted to renovation work, scraping, cleaning, painting. Bill Hansen's crew handled the major repairs while Grace tackled whatever she could to save money. Tyler helped after school, surprisingly enthusiastic about the project. But nights were for investigating. Armed with Pete's journal and work lights, Grace systematically explored every inch of the diner. She measured walls, looking for discrepancies that might indicate hidden spaces. She tapped floors, listening for hollow sounds. She examined every photograph Pete had collected, searching for clues. The safe in the basement remained stubbornly locked. She'd called 3 locksmiths, all said it would need to be drilled open, destroying any contents in the process. Grace hesitated, feeling oddly certain that the safe's contents mattered. On Thursday evening, while Tyler was at practice, Grace noticed something in one of Pete's photographs. It showed the diner's interior in 1976, with Vincent Torino behind the counter. But in the reflection of the coffee pot, she could see numbers written on a small board, July 31, 19. Heart pounding, Grace descended to the basement and knelt before the safe. She turned the dial carefully, right to 31, left to 7, right to 19. Click. The safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of yellowed documents, leather-bound ledgers, and surprisingly, several sealed plastic bags containing what looked like film reels and cassette tapes. At the bottom lay a manila envelope marked insurance. Grace's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photographs, black and white images of men in suits meeting in the diner, exchanging briefcases, shaking hands. Some faces looked vaguely familiar. One photo showed a man she recognized from history books, Anthony Big Tony Torelli, a notorious mob boss from the 1970s. The ledgers were even more damning. Written in code, but a simple one Grace could partially decipher, they detailed payments, shipments, and meetings. The Blue Moon hadn't just been a diner, it had been a crucial meeting point for organized crime operations across the Midwest. The film reels were labeled with dates and initials. The cassettes bore similar markings. Grace didn't have equipment to view or play them, but their very existence sent chills down her spine. At the bottom of the safe, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small notebook. Vincent Torino's personal journal. The final entry was dated October 12, 1978, the night he disappeared. They know, he'd written. Federal investigation getting close. Tony wants me gone, permanently. Hidden everything that matters. If something happens, tell Helen I loved her. Tell her to check booth 7-inch. Booth 7. Grace grabbed a work light and hurried upstairs. The booths were numbered on small brass plates. She found number 7 and examined it carefully. The seat seemed solid, but when she pressed on the back panel, it gave slightly. Using a screwdriver, she pried at the edges. The panel popped free, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was another plastic-wrapped package. Grace opened it carefully. More photographs, but these were different. They showed FBI agents. Their names and badge numbers were written on the backs. And there were recordings, small reels labeled, FBI payment authorizations. The truth hit her like cold water. Vincent Torino hadn't just been working with the mob. He'd been an FBI informant. The ledgers, the recordings, this was evidence of a massive federal operation. And judging by the names in these documents, some of those federal agents had been taking mob money too. Her phone rang, shattering the silence. Unknown number. Hello. Ms. Mitchell. A woman's voice, professional and cold. This is Special Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. We understand you've been renovating the Blue Moon Diner. Grace's mouth went dry. Yes. We'd like to discuss some historical matters related to the property. Would tomorrow morning work for you? I suppose so. Excellent. We'll see you at 10. And Ms. Mitchell. It would be best if you didn't mention this call to anyone. The line went dead. Grace stared at the evidence spread before her. What had she stumbled into? This wasn't just old mob history, this was proof of federal corruption, of cover-ups, of crimes that might still have consequences 40 years later. She carefully repacked everything and returned it to the safe, but kept Vincent's journal. Something told her she might need bargaining chips. That night, she barely slept. When Tyler asked why she seemed distracted, she forced a smile and talked about contractor schedules. But her mind kept returning to those photographs, those names, those implications. Friday morning arrived too quickly. Grace dressed carefully, professional but not trying too hard. She arrived at the diner to find 2 black SUVs already in the parking lot. Agent Chen was younger than her voice had suggested, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her partner, Agent Mills, was older, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much. Ms. Mitchell, Chen said, displaying her badge. Thank you for meeting us. May we come in? Grace led them inside, acutely aware of the safe in the basement below their feet. We understand you've been doing extensive renovations, Mills said, looking around. Found anything interesting? Old menus. Some photographs. Nothing special. Chen smiled thinly. Ms. Mitchell, we know Peter Walsh spent years researching this building's history. We know he believed Vincent Torino hid something here. And we know you've been following his notes. Is that a crime? No. But withholding evidence is. Evidence of what? Mills leaned forward. Vincent Torino was murdered in 1978. His body was found in the river 2 states away. The men who killed him were never prosecuted because key evidence disappeared. Evidence that was reportedly hidden in this diner. Grace kept her expression neutral. I haven't found any evidence of murder. Perhaps not, Chen said. But if you do find anything, documents, recordings, photographs, relating to organized crime activities or federal investigations from that period, you're legally obligated to turn them over. Of course. Chen placed a business card on the counter. Call us immediately if anything turns up. And Ms. Mitchell. Some of the people involved in those old operations are still alive. Still powerful. Still very interested in keeping the past buried. Be careful. After the FBI agents left, Grace sat in booth 7, Vincent's journal open before her. The agent's warning echoed in her mind, but something felt off about their visit. They'd been fishing, not investigating. They didn't know what was here, they were hoping she'd lead them to it. She reread Vincent's final entries. Between the paranoid ramblings were nuggets of clear information. Names, dates, and most importantly, references to the complete files, and evidence that goes all the way to the top. That evening, Grace called Helen Torino. I need to show you something. Helen arrived within an hour. When Grace showed her Vincent's journal, the older woman's hands shook. This is his handwriting, she whispered. After all these years. Helen, your father was an FBI informant. I suspected, but could never prove it. The FBI denied everything after he died. Grace made a decision. She led Helen to the basement and opened the safe. Helen gasped at the contents. My God. He documented everything. Together, they went through the materials more carefully. The ledgers weren't just mob records, they were parallel books showing FBI payments to Vincent for information. The photographs documented meetings between federal agents and crime figures. The tapes, when they found an old player in the storage room, contained conversations that made both women's blood run cold. Corrupt agents discussing murder. Federal prosecutors taking bribes. A conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. This is why they killed him, Helen said quietly. He wasn't just informing on the mob. He was documenting corruption in the very agencies that were supposed to protect him. One tape was labeled, "Insurance Policy, October 1978, Vincent's voice, tense with fear. If you're listening to this, I'm probably dead. The names I'm about to give you are federal agents and prosecutors who've been taking mob money for years. They've sabotaged cases, destroyed evidence, and eliminated witnesses. I have proof of everything. Documents are in the main safe. But the real evidence, the films that will destroy them all, check the time capsule. Joey knows where. The FBI killed me as surely as the mob did. Trust no one in authority. This goes to the very top. Time capsule. Grace said. And who's Joey? Helen frowned. Joey Martinelli was our cook. Died in 1995. But time capsule, her eyes widened. The diner's 25th anniversary. 1977, Dad made a big deal about burying a time capsule in the parking lot. Said we'd open it in 2002, but by then the diner had changed hands. They hurried outside with shovels and the metal detector Grace had bought for the renovation. After an hour of searching, the detector pinged near the old flagpole. 3 feet down, they hit metal. The time capsule was a large steel drum, sealed with tar. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic, were film canisters and more documents. Grace held up one canister to the light. The label read, FBI District Chief Matthews accepting payment from A. Torelli, June 1978. Matthews, Helen breathed. He became deputy director. Retired with full honors in 1995. They carried everything inside. As they catalogued the evidence, the scope became clear. This wasn't just historical corruption, some of these people were still alive, still influential. Judges, politicians, business leaders who'd built careers on mob money and federal protection. Grace's phone rang. Roger. Grace, what have you done? FBI agents just left my office. They're asking about the diner, about what you might have found. They mentioned custody proceedings. What? They said if you're involved in a federal investigation, it could impact Tyler's living situation. Grace, whatever you're doing, stop. Think about our son. Grace hung up, fury building. They were threatening her through Tyler. We need help, Helen said. But who can we trust? This evidence implicates people who might still have connections everywhere. Grace thought hard. Then she remembered something from Pete's journal. A name circled multiple times, Margaret Sullivan, investigative journalist. I need to make a call, Grace said. Margaret Sullivan answered on the third ring. Now in her 70s, she'd spent decades exposing corruption. When Grace explained what they'd found, there was a long silence. I've been waiting 40 years for this call, Margaret said finally. Vincent contacted me 2 weeks before he died. Said he had evidence that would bring down half the Midwest's power structure. Then he vanished. Can you help us? I'll be there in 3 hours. Don't call anyone else. Don't let those documents out of your sight. And Grace. They killed Vincent for this. They'll do worse to you if they find out what you have. While they waited, Grace and Helen organized everything chronologically. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning decades. The FBI hadn't just been infiltrated, entire divisions had been compromised. When Margaret arrived, she brought a young tech expert named David who began digitizing everything immediately. We need to move fast, Margaret said, reviewing documents with practiced efficiency. Once this goes public, they can't touch you. But until then, you're in danger. The FBI agents who visited, Grace said. Chen and Mills. Are they? Margaret checked her sources via encrypted phone. No agents by those names in the regional office. They were phishing, probably sent by someone implicated in these files. Grace felt sick. They threatened my son. Then we work faster. Through the night, they documented everything. Margaret crafted the story that would expose it all. David created encrypted backups, sending copies to secure servers worldwide. By dawn, they had everything ready. This will be published simultaneously in 12 major outlets, Margaret explained. Online and print. Once it's out there, they can't suppress it. What about Tyler and me? Will we be safe? Helen took Grace's hand. You're doing what my father tried to do. You're bringing justice. That matters. We'll arrange protection, Margaret assured her. Witness protection if necessary. But Grace, this story, it's going to change everything. Are you ready for that? Grace thought about her family's mockery, Roger's threats, the FBI's intimidation. Then she thought about Vincent Torino, murdered for trying to do the right thing. About Pete, who'd preserved this evidence hoping someone would be brave enough to use it. I'm ready. The story broke at 6 a.m. Monday morning. 40 years of lies, how FBI corruption and mob money built an empire of influence, screamed headlines across the country. Margaret's investigation, backed by the irrefutable evidence from the Blue Moon Diner, sent shockwaves through law enforcement and political circles. Grace watched the news from a hotel room where Margaret's security team had moved her and Tyler. Her phone had been turned off on their advice, but she could imagine the calls flooding in. "Mom, we're on TV," Tyler said, pointing at the screen. Coverage showed the Blue Moon Diner surrounded by news vans and federal agents, real ones this time. By noon, 3 former FBI officials had been arrested. A federal judge was under investigation. 2 state senators announced sudden retirements. The deputy director of the FBI held a press conference promising a thorough investigation. But Grace couldn't relax. Margaret's security chief, a former marshal named Rick Torres, had been clear: the first 72 hours are the most dangerous. People with this much to lose don't go down quietly. His prediction proved accurate that evening. "We've got company," Torres announced, watching his monitors. 2 vehicles circling the block. "They've passed 4 times." "FBI?" Grace asked. "Doubt it. Too sloppy for feds, too professional for media." The hotel phone rang. Torres answered, listened, then handed it to Grace. "Someone asking for you specifically. Says he's a family friend." Grace. The voice was unfamiliar, smooth, and cultured. "You don't know me, but I knew Vincent Torino. We need to talk." "Who is this?" "Someone who stands to lose everything when those documents are fully analyzed. I'm offering you a deal. A very generous deal." "I'm not interested." $10 million. Cash. Untraceable. All you have to do is say you fabricated some of the evidence. Create reasonable doubt. Your son gets the best education money can buy. You never worry about bills again. No. 20 million. And protection. Real protection, not whatever amateur hour operation you have now. Grace hung up. Torres looked grim. "They'll escalate now. We need to move." As they packed, Tyler asked quietly, "Are we in danger because of what you found?" Grace couldn't lie to him. "Yes. But we're doing the right thing." "I know," he said, surprising her. "Dad called earlier, on the hotel phone. Said you were being selfish, putting me at risk. But he's wrong. You're being brave." They moved to a second location, switching vehicles twice. Torres coordinated with legitimate FBI agents who were now taking the threat seriously. The evidence Grace had uncovered had triggered the largest internal investigation in Bureau history. At the new safe house, Director Collins himself arrived to brief them. "Ms. Mitchell, what you've exposed goes deeper than we imagined. We've uncovered connections to current operations, active cases that were compromised. You've given us the thread to unravel 40 years of corruption. What about the people threatening us? We're tracking several groups. Some are former agents trying to cover their tracks. Others are current criminals who benefited from the corruption. We've increased your protection detail." That night, as Grace tried to sleep, she heard commotion outside. Torres burst in. "We need to move. Now." Through the window, Grace saw armed figures approaching from multiple directions. Not law enforcement, these moved like military contractors. They rushed to a reinforced panic room in the basement. Grace held Tyler close as gunfire erupted above them. Torres coordinated with the FBI response team over radio. "Federal agents are 3 minutes out," he reported. "These walls will hold." The attack was swift but intense. Grace could hear shouting, explosions, the sound of breaking glass. Tyler trembled beside her, trying to be brave. Then, sudden silence. "All clear," came a voice over Torres' radio. "Suspects in custody. No casualties on our side." They emerged to find the safe house swarming with FBI agents. Director Collins arrived shortly after, looking grim. "3 of the attackers were former federal agents implicated in your documents," he explained. "They were trying to eliminate witnesses before their arrests. We got them all." "Are we safe now?" Tyler asked. "Safer," Collins admitted. "But we're moving you to a federal facility. No more private safe houses." As they prepared to leave, Grace's phone, cleared and returned by the FBI, rang. It was Rebecca. "Grace, are you okay? The news is saying there was an attack." "We're fine," Grace assured her. "How's everyone there?" "Shocked. Mom's been calling nonstop. She's terrified for you. Even David admitted you were right about the diner." "Grace, Roger's been on TV, claiming he had no idea about any of this." "Of course he was. Roger always protected himself first. The federal facility was a fortress, underground bunkers, military-grade security, communications blackout. Grace and Tyler were given adjoining rooms, comfortable but clearly designed for protection, not luxury. Over the next days, Grace gave detailed depositions, helped decode documents, identified faces in photographs. The investigation expanded daily. More arrests, more revelations. The corruption had infected local police, state government, federal agencies. Margaret visited, bringing news from outside. "Your story has triggered investigations in 6 states. The president has called for complete reform of federal law enforcement. You've changed history, Grace." "I just wanted to save a diner," Grace said quietly. "Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences." Tyler, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity at his school, the kid whose mom exposed massive corruption. He handled it with surprising maturity, focusing on his studies and basketball. One evening, Director Collins brought unexpected news. "We've arrested Alan Crawford. Your ex-husband's developer friend. He was laundering money for organizations connected to the original corruption network. Your refusal to sell the diner disrupted a major money laundering operation." Grace almost laughed at the irony. Roger's friend, the one who'd pressured her to sell, had been a criminal all along. "There's more," Collins continued. "We've traced financial connections between Crawford and your ex-husband. Roger may have been more involved than he's admitting." Grace's blood chilled. "Roger's corrupt. We're investigating." "But Grace, if he was involved, if he knew what was hidden in that diner." His custody threat takes on a different meaning. He wasn't trying to protect Tyler. He was trying to control you. The full weight of betrayal settled on her. Roger hadn't just cheated on their marriage, he might have been part of the very corruption she'd exposed. That night, unable to sleep, Grace stood at her window looking out at the guards patrolling the facility. She'd started this journey as a struggling waitress, mocked for choosing a worthless diner. Now she was at the center of the biggest corruption scandal in American history. And it all began because she'd refused to take the easy money. 2 weeks into protective custody, the investigation had grown beyond anyone's imagination. Grace watched from the facility's secure briefing room as Director Collins updated her on the latest developments. "We've made 47 arrests so far," he reported. "Former agents, current officials, business leaders. Your evidence has exposed a network that's been operating since the 1970s, passed down like a corrupt inheritance from one generation to the next. What about Roger? Grace asked, though she dreaded the answer. Collins pulled up a file on his tablet. Roger Mitchell has been under surveillance since the Crawford arrest. We've documented meetings with known members of the network dating back 5 years, shortly after your divorce. Grace felt sick. He knew about the diner all along. We believe so. The network had been watching the property for decades, waiting for the right opportunity to acquire it and destroy any remaining evidence. When your Uncle Pete died and left it to you specifically, they activated Roger. The affair with Christina. Christina Vaughn isn't just a dental hygienist, Collins confirmed. She's the daughter of Marcus Vaughn, one of the original corrupt agents from the 1970s. The entire relationship was orchestrated to position Roger for the divorce and ultimately gain control of the diner. Grace sank into her chair. Her entire life had been manipulated by criminals desperate to hide their secrets. Tyler can never know this. It would destroy him. That's your choice. But there's more. Collins hesitated. We've uncovered a planned operation for tomorrow night. The remaining network members are meeting to coordinate fleeing the country. We want to use you as bait. Absolutely not, Torres interjected from his corner. She's a civilian. Hear me out, Collins continued. They believe Grace has held back evidence, Vincent's personal recordings that could implicate the highest levels. If she agrees to meet with them, to negotiate, we can capture the entire leadership in one operation. You want me to walk into a trap? A controlled trap. You'll be wired, surrounded by undercover agents. The moment they incriminate themselves, we move in. Tyler, who'd been quietly doing homework in the corner, looked up. Mom, don't. Grace went to her son. Sometimes we have to take risks to end things properly. What if something goes wrong? What if they hurt you? She hugged him tight. Then you'll know I was trying to make the world safer for you. After hours of planning, Grace agreed. The meet would happen at an abandoned warehouse the network used for sensitive discussions. She would claim to have Vincent's final recordings, evidence that implicated current senators and judges still free. Her price, safe passage for her and Tyler, plus $50 million. Margaret, observing the preparations, pulled Grace aside. You don't have to do this. We have enough to destroy them without risking your life. They killed Vincent for trying to expose them. They've threatened my son. They've manipulated my entire life. I need to see this through. The next night, Grace sat in an FBI van as agents fitted her with hidden cameras and microphones. Torres would be in the warehouse, posing as her hired security. Dozens of agents were positioned around the building. Remember, Collins instructed, we need them to explicitly discuss their crimes. Get them talking about Vincent, about the murders, about the current operations. The moment anyone draws a weapon, say, I need some air, and we'll breach. The warehouse loomed dark against the night sky. Grace's heart pounded as she walked through the entrance, Torres beside her. Inside, industrial lights created pools of brightness in the vast space. 5 people waited at a table in the center. Grace recognized 2 from photographs, former Deputy Director Franklin, supposedly dead of a heart attack, and Judge Catherine Wells, who'd allegedly died in a house fire. Ms. Mitchell, Franklin said smoothly. So nice to finally meet the woman who's caused such upheaval. I just wanted to renovate a diner, Grace replied, proud that her voice remained steady. And instead you've destroyed lives, careers, legacies built over decades. Judge Wells's voice was ice. Do you have any idea how many cases will be overturned because of your meddling? Criminal cases. Cases where innocent people were convicted while the guilty walked free. Franklin smiled coldly. Naive. The system requires balance. We maintain that balance. Through murder and corruption. Through necessity, a new voice came from the shadows. Roger stepped into the light, looking haggard but defiant. Hello, Grace. Grace's shock was genuine. This wasn't part of the plan. Roger. You're one of them. I became one of them. After the divorce, when I realized what Pete had hidden, I approached them. They offered me everything: money, connections, success. All I had to do was get the diner. So you sent Crawford, filed for custody, threatened our son. Roger's face hardened. Tyler would have been fine. Better off, actually. The network takes care of its own. You could have had that protection too, if you just sold the damn property. Like they took care of Vincent Torino. The room tensed. Franklin leaned forward. Vincent was going to destroy everything. We offered him money, protection, a new life. He chose betrayal instead. You murdered him. We eliminated a threat, Judge Wells corrected. Just as we'll eliminate the current threat. Do you really think your FBI protection will last forever? This network has survived 40 years because we're patient. We can wait. Is that a threat? Franklin smiled. It's a promise. Unless you hand over Vincent's final recordings. The ones we know you're hiding. Grace reached into her bag slowly, pulling out a cassette tape. You mean these? Vincent's confession naming every corrupt official, every dirty deal, every murder. The room's attention focused on the tape. Grace could feel the tension, the greed, the desperation. Play it, Franklin ordered. Grace moved to an old cassette player on the table. As she inserted the tape, she caught Torres's eye. He shifted slightly, hand moving to his concealed weapon. Vincent's voice filled the warehouse. If you're listening to this, then they've finally come for me. What follows is my complete confession. The conspirators leaned in, absorbed. This was the moment. I need some air, Grace said clearly. The warehouse erupted. FBI agents burst through every entrance. The conspirators scattered, but there was nowhere to run. Franklin tried to grab Grace, but Torres was there, taking him down hard. Roger stood frozen as agents surrounded him. He looked at Grace with something like regret. I'm sorry, he said as they cuffed him. Tell Tyler. Tell him I'm sorry. In minutes, it was over. Every conspirator was in custody. The network that had terrorized and corrupted for 40 years was finally finished. Director Collins found Grace sitting outside, shaking from adrenaline. You did it. You got them all on tape, confessing to everything. Roger too, she said quietly. Tyler's father is going to prison. He made his choices. You made yours. And because of your courage, this ends now. As Grace was driven back to the facility, she thought about Tyler waiting for her. How would she tell him about his father? How would they move forward from this? But they would move forward. The corruption was exposed, the criminals caught, the truth finally told. And at the center of it all was a worthless diner that had turned out to be worth everything. The arrests from the warehouse operation sent shockwaves through the establishment. Grace watched the news coverage from the federal facility, Tyler beside her, as reporter after reporter detailed the scope of the conspiracy. Among those arrested was Roger Mitchell, ex-husband of the woman who exposed this corruption, the anchor reported. Mitchell allegedly attempted to gain control of the Blue Moon Diner to destroy evidence of the criminal network. Tyler clicked off the TV. He hadn't spoken much since learning about his father's involvement. Grace waited, giving him space to process. Did Dad ever love us? He finally asked. Or was everything a lie? Grace chose her words carefully. I think he loved us in his way. But somewhere along the line, he loved money and power more. The FBI agent said Christina was part of it too. That their whole relationship was fake. Yes. Tyler was quiet for a moment. That actually makes me feel better. Like maybe he didn't leave us for someone better. He left because he was weak. Grace hugged her son, amazed by his maturity. Director Collins arrived with more revelations. We've been interrogating the conspirators. Grace, what we've learned. It's staggering. He spread files across the table. Your brother David. His cryptocurrency losses weren't bad luck. The network manipulated the market specifically to compromise him, making him dependent on dirty money to survive. Grace stared at the evidence. They destroyed my brother's life just to have leverage over me. Your sister Rebecca's real estate company has been unknowingly laundering money for years. The network steered criminal clients to her, using her legitimate business as cover. She had no idea. My God. My whole family. They've been surrounding you for years, Grace. Ever since Pete inherited the diner, they've been positioning assets. Your mother's country club friends. Several are network members. Tyler's basketball coach. On their payroll to report on your family's activities. Grace felt sick. Their entire lives had been orchestrated, manipulated, observed. There's more, Collins continued reluctantly. Roger's parents. We've discovered they were original network members from the 1970s. Roger grew up in this corruption. He was groomed from childhood to be an asset. So when he married me, we don't think that was planned. By all accounts, he genuinely loved you. But when the network activated him after Pete's death, he chose his upbringing over his marriage. Tyler stood abruptly and walked to the window. Grace could see his shoulders shaking. Give us a minute, she asked Collins. When they were alone, Grace joined Tyler at the window. I'm sorry you had to hear all this. It's like our whole life was fake, Tyler said, voice thick. Every birthday party, every family dinner, every time Dad came to my games. Someone was watching, planning, using us. No, Grace said firmly. Our life was real. Our love is real. The good memories we have, they're real. Bad people tried to use us, but they failed. We're still here, still together, still good people. Tyler turned to her. How are you so strong? Everyone betrayed you. Dad, your family, even people you didn't know were involved. How are you not angry all the time? I am angry. But I'm also grateful. Grateful I found the truth. Grateful I could stop them. Grateful I have you, she touched his face. We're going to be okay. A knock interrupted them. Margaret Sullivan entered with someone Grace didn't expect, her mother, Patricia. Patricia looked older, frail, her usual perfect composure cracked. Grace, she said, voice trembling. I need to tell you something. Grace tensed. You were part of it too. No. Patricia sat heavily. But I knew. Not everything, but. I knew Roger's family was connected to something dark. I knew they had plans for you. And you let me marry him. I thought if you married into their circle, you'd be protected. Safe. I didn't know they were criminals. I thought they were just powerful people who could give you a good life. You sold me to them. Patricia flinched. I was trying to protect you. Your father had just died. We had no money. Roger's family offered to pay for the wedding, help with college. I thought I was being practical. You were being a coward, Grace said coldly. Yes, Patricia admitted, tears falling. I was. And I've watched for 20 years as they slowly destroyed my children. David's failures, Rebecca's unwitting crimes, your divorce, all orchestrated. And I said nothing because I was afraid. Tyler spoke up. Why tell us now? Patricia looked at her grandson. Because you deserve the truth. And because I'm proud of your mother. She did what I never could. She stood up to them. Grace felt her anger wavering. Her mother looked broken, diminished. What else do you know? Roger's parents kept files on everyone in their network. Insurance, they called it. After they died, Roger inherited everything. It's in a safety deposit box at Riverside National Bank. Collins, who'd been listening from the doorway, immediately made a call. Within hours, they had a warrant. The safety deposit box contained exactly what Patricia had promised, decades of network files. Photos, recordings, financial documents. The evidence implicated hundreds more people, including current officials who'd escaped the first wave of arrests. "This is it," Collins told Grace. "The complete network. Every corrupt official, every compromised business, every dirty secret. Because of you, we can clean house completely." But Grace was looking at one file in particular. It contained surveillance photos of her family going back 20 years. Her wedding, Tyler's birth, family gatherings, all documented by the network. In one photo, she saw her father at her college graduation. In the background, barely visible, was Roger's father, watching. Planning. "They stole our lives," she whispered. Margaret put a hand on her shoulder. "No. They tried to steal your lives. But you fought back. You won." That evening, Grace made difficult calls to Rebecca and David. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to fury to shame. Rebecca, learning her successful business was built on criminal money, broke down completely. David, finally understanding why his life had spiraled, went silent. "What do we do now?" Rebecca asked through tears. "We rebuild," Grace said. "Honestly this time. No shortcuts, no dirty money, no compromises. We do it right." "With what?" "Everything I have is tainted. We'll figure it out. Together. The way family is supposed to." As Grace hung up, Tyler brought her tea. "You're forgiving them?" "After everything." "They were victims too," Grace said. "The network destroyed their lives just like they tried to destroy ours. The difference is, we fought back. Because of the diner." "Because of the diner," Grace agreed. Who knew a worthless building could be worth so much? Tyler smiled, his first real smile in days. "Uncle Pete knew. Somehow, he knew you'd be the one to find the truth." Outside, the world was learning the full scope of the corruption. More arrests were coming. More lives would be shattered. But in their small room in the federal facility, Grace and Tyler had found something precious, the truth about their lives, their family, and their own strength. The network had tried to control them from birth. It had failed. And in failing, it had created its own destruction. All because one divorced waitress refused to sell a broken-down diner. The trial of the century, as media dubbed it, began 6 months after the warehouse arrests. Grace sat in the witness box, facing a courtroom packed with reporters, lawyers, and the few conspirators who hadn't negotiated plea deals. Roger was among them, looking gaunt in his prison jumpsuit. He avoided her eyes as she testified about finding Vincent Torino's evidence, about the threats, about the network's attempts to silence her. "Mrs. Mitchell," the prosecutor asked, "why didn't you accept any of the offers to sell the diner?" Grace looked directly at the jury. "Because it wasn't about money. It was about honoring my Uncle Pete's memory. He preserved that evidence for decades, waiting for someone to find it. I couldn't let him down." Her testimony lasted 3 days. She detailed everything, the discovery, the FBI's involvement, the attacks, the revelations about her family. When defense attorneys tried to paint her as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge, she remained calm. "I didn't know my ex-husband was involved until the night of the warehouse operation," she stated clearly. "If anything, I was hoping he wasn't part of it. For our son's sake." Roger's attorney made one last attempt. "Isn't it true you've become wealthy from this situation? That you're now worth millions? The government seized criminal assets and awarded whistleblower funds, yes. But I would trade every penny to have not gone through this. To have my son's father be an honest man. To have my family's lives not be manipulated by criminals." When she stepped down, the courtroom was silent. Even hardened reporters seemed moved by her dignity. The verdicts came 2 weeks later. Guilty on all counts. Roger received 15 years. Judge Wells, 25. Former Deputy Director Franklin, life without parole for ordering Vincent Torino's murder and others. Grace and Tyler watched from the gallery as Roger was led away. He looked back once, mouthing, "I'm sorry," to his son. Tyler nodded once, then looked away. Outside the courthouse, Grace faced a forest of microphones. "This isn't about vengeance," she said. "It's about justice. For Vincent Torino, for Pete Walsh, for everyone who was silenced or destroyed by this network. Today, they got justice." Margaret Sullivan, covering the trial for her final story before retirement, asked, "What's next for you and Tyler?" "We're going to rebuild the Blue Moon Diner," Grace announced. "Not just as a restaurant, but as a museum. A reminder that sometimes the most valuable things come in unexpected packages." The announcement sparked immediate interest. Donations poured in from across the country. The FBI pledged support. The city of Riverside, embarrassed by how many officials had been implicated, offered tax breaks and historical designation. 6 months later, Grace stood once again in front of the Blue Moon Diner. But this time, she wasn't alone. Tyler was beside her, along with Rebecca, David, and even Patricia. Helen Torino held a pair of golden scissors. The building had been transformed. The exterior gleamed with fresh paint and restored neon. Inside, one half remained a functioning diner with modern equipment. The other half was a museum, displaying evidence from the case, photos of Vincent and Pete, and the story of how one woman's refusal to sell had exposed decades of corruption. "My father would be so proud," Helen said, tears in her eyes. He died trying to expose the truth. Today, his story will be told forever." Grace handed her the scissors. "You should do the honors." As Helen cut the ribbon, the crowd erupted in applause. Among them were FBI agents who'd worked the case, journalists who'd covered it, and ordinary citizens who'd been inspired by the story. The first customers included Director Collins, now head of the FBI's new anti-corruption division. "This place," he told Grace, "will serve as a training site for new agents. A reminder of what happens when we forget our duty." Tyler worked the register, having insisted on helping run the family business. At 17, he'd grown into a thoughtful young man, shaped by extraordinary circumstances but not broken by them. College acceptances had poured in, all offering full scholarships to the kid who'd stood by his mother against impossible odds. Rebecca arrived for her shift. She dissolved her tainted real estate company and insisted on working at the diner while rebuilding her life honestly. "Table 6 wants to know if you're the famous Grace Mitchell," she said with a smile. "Tell them I'm just a waitress," Grace replied, tying on an apron. The museum side drew steady crowds. People came to see the safe where Grace had found the evidence, Booth 7 with its hidden compartment, the basement that had concealed secrets for decades. School groups toured regularly, learning about integrity and courage. David had taken charge of the museum, finding purpose in educating others about how corruption had destroyed his life. "I was weak," he'd tell visitors. "I took the easy money without asking questions. Don't be like me. Be like my sister." Even Patricia found redemption, volunteering as a tour guide. She'd sold her house, donated most to victim compensation funds, and moved to a small apartment near the diner. "I spent 70 years caring about the wrong things," she'd say. Appearances, status, wealth. "My daughter taught me what really matters." 3 months after opening, Margaret Sullivan returned for her book launch. The Blue Moon Files had become an instant bestseller. She insisted on holding the event at the diner. "This story," she told the packed room, "isn't just about crime and corruption. It's about the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things." Grace Mitchell wasn't a federal agent or a prosecutor. She was a divorced mom working double shifts to pay rent. But when tested, she chose truth over comfort, justice over safety, integrity over wealth. Grace, uncomfortable with praise, tried to slip into the kitchen. Tyler caught her arm. "You need to hear this, Mom. You need to understand what you did." Margaret continued, "The network operated for 40 years because good people stayed silent. They were afraid, or comfortable, or compromised. It took one person saying no to bring it all down. One person refusing to take the easy path." After the event, Grace found herself alone in booth 7, where it all began. The weight of everything, the fear, the loss, the victories, settled on her shoulders. "You did it," a voice said. She looked up to find Roger's mother, Eleanor Mitchell, standing uncertainly by the table. The woman who'd helped raise Roger in corruption, now in her 80s and facing her own legal troubles. "Mrs. Mitchell," Grace said carefully. "I came to apologize," Eleanor said. "And to thank you." "Thank me." "For stopping us. For ending the sickness we passed to our children." She pulled out an envelope. "Roger asked me to give you this. He's not allowed contact, but the prison made an exception for this letter." Grace took it reluctantly. Inside, Roger's familiar handwriting. "Grace, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. What I did, to you, to Tyler, to our family, is unforgivable. But I want you to know that loving you and Tyler was the only real thing in my life. Everything else was performance, manipulation, lies. But not that. Tell Tyler I'm getting help. Therapy, education, whatever the prison offers. Maybe someday I can be the father he deserved from the start. You saved us all, Grace. Even those of us who fought against you. Roger." Grace folded the letter carefully. She wouldn't share it with Tyler yet, he needed more time to heal. But someday, when he was ready, she'd let him decide whether to forgive his father. A year after the diner's reopening, Grace received an unexpected call. The president wanted to award her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. "I don't need medals," she told Director Collins. "It's not about what you need. It's about what the country needs, heroes to look up to. Examples of ordinary citizens standing up to power." So Grace stood in the White House, Tyler beside her in his first suit, as the president spoke about courage and integrity. The medal felt heavy around her neck, but not as heavy as the responsibility it represented. Back at the diner, business thrived. They'd hired local kids who needed chances, elderly folks who needed purpose, and even a few ex-convicts trying to restart their lives. The Blue Moon had become more than a restaurant or museum, it was a symbol of redemption. One evening, as Grace tallied receipts, Tyler brought her coffee. "Mom, I've decided on college." "Oh. Georgetown. Criminal justice major, then law school. I want to be a prosecutor. Fight corruption the legal way." Grace smiled. "Following in no one's footsteps but your own. Actually, I'm following in yours. You showed me that one person can make a difference." As closing time approached, Grace stood outside, looking at the neon sign blazing against the dark sky. The Blue Moon Diner, once mocked as worthless, had become priceless. Not for the money it generated or the fame it brought, but for what it represented. Truth over lies. Courage over comfort. Justice over corruption. Vincent Torino had died trying to expose the truth. Pete Walsh had preserved it for decades. And Grace Mitchell, a divorced waitress everyone underestimated, had finished what they started. The FBI estimated the network's 40-year operation had cost taxpayers billions, destroyed thousands of lives, and corrupted every level of government. All of it brought down by evidence hidden in a basement, protected by a stubborn woman who refused to take the easy money. As Grace locked up for the night, she touched the small plaque by the door, "New Edition," suggested by Tyler. The Blue Moon Diner, where truth lives, in memory of Vincent Torino and Peter Walsh, champions of justice. Below it, in smaller letters, "Never underestimate the power of saying no to corruption. Grace Mitchell." She smiled, thinking of everyone who'd called her foolish for keeping the diner. They'd been right about one thing: it had changed her life. Just not in the way they'd expected. 5 years after the FBI excavated the truth from the Blue Moon Diner's basement, Grace Mitchell stood before another packed audience. This time, it wasn't a courtroom or a ribbon cutting, but the graduation ceremony at Georgetown Law School. "Mom, you're going to be late." Tyler called from the hotel bathroom, fussing with his graduation robes. "The keynote speaker can't be late," Grace replied, smoothing her dress. She still felt like that exhausted waitress sometimes, despite everything that had changed. Tyler emerged, 22 now and the image of the man Roger could have been, handsome, confident, but with an integrity his father had lacked. "You nervous?" Terrified, Grace admitted. "Serving coffee to truckers didn't exactly prepare me for addressing law school graduates." "You addressed Congress. You testified against corrupt judges. You brought down a criminal empire. I think you can handle some 20-somethings." At the ceremony, Grace sat on the platform looking out at hundreds of eager faces. Tyler was in the third row, beaming with pride. Near him sat Rebecca, David, and even Patricia, the family that had been shattered and rebuilt stronger. When introduced, Grace approached the podium to thunderous applause. She waited for quiet, then began. 5 years ago, I was nobody. A divorced waitress working double shifts, mocked by my family for refusing to sell a worthless diner. Today, that diner is a national landmark, and I'm speaking at one of the country's finest law schools. The journey between those 2 points taught me something crucial: justice isn't found in titles or positions. It's found in choices. She spoke of Vincent Torino, murdered for documenting truth. Of Pete Walsh, who preserved evidence for decades. Of the moment she opened that safe and realized she held 40 years of secrets. The network I exposed operated through a simple principle: everyone has a price. They believed that with enough money, enough pressure, enough threats, anyone would comply. They were wrong. Integrity isn't for sale. In the audience, Tyler wiped his eyes. His mother had become a national symbol of citizen courage, but to him, she was still the woman who'd worked 18-hour days to keep them afloat. After the ceremony, they returned to Riverside and the Blue Moon Diner. Grace insisted on working her regular Wednesday shift, despite the Medal of Freedom in her office and the millions in whistleblower rewards in her accounts. The diner had evolved into something unprecedented: part restaurant, part museum, part training center. FBI Academy classes studied the case in the basement where evidence was found. Law students examined documents in climate-controlled displays. Tourists took selfies in Booth 7. But it was still a working diner. Grace poured coffee for construction workers, served pie to elderly couples, listened to teenagers complain about homework. The ordinary moments grounded her, reminded her why she'd fought. "Order up," called Marcus, still head cook after 5 years. He'd used his second chance to become an excellent chef and mentor to troubled youth. As Grace delivered plates, she noticed a familiar face at the counter: Judge Catherine Wells' daughter, Sarah. The young woman looked nervous, conflicted. "Ms. Mitchell. Could we talk?" Grace sat beside her. Sarah's mother was serving 25 years, her family destroyed by association. "I hated you," Sarah said quietly. "For years, I hated you for ruining my life. My mother was a federal judge. We had everything. Then you came along with your evidence and..." "Your mother was corrupt," Grace said gently. "She sent innocent people to prison. Took bribes from murderers. I know that now. I've read the trial transcripts, seen the evidence. But she's still my mother." Sarah pulled out an envelope. "She asked me to give you this." Grace recognized the prison stationery. Inside, Wells had written, "Ms. Mitchell, I've had 5 years to reflect on my choices. 5 years to understand that my pursuit of wealth and power cost me everything that mattered: my integrity, my freedom, my daughter's respect. You asked during the trial if I felt remorse. I said no. I lied. The remorse eats at me daily, not for being caught, but for becoming someone my daughter can't be proud of. Thank you for stopping us. Thank you for saving others from making our mistakes. K. Wells." Grace handed the letter back to Sarah. "Your mother is finding her way back to who she should have been. That takes courage too." After Sarah left, Helen Torino arrived for her weekly volunteer shift. Now in her 70s, she ran tours of the museum section, telling visitors about her father's sacrifice. "Grace, there's someone here asking for you specifically," Helen said. "Says he has information about another network." Grace found a young man waiting nervously by the museum entrance. He looked around constantly, clearly frightened. "Ms. Mitchell. I'm James Chen." I work for a defense contractor. I think my company is selling classified technology to foreign governments. I've found evidence, but I don't know who to trust. The FBI, Congress, they could all be compromised again. Grace studied him, the same desperation she'd once felt, the same moral crisis. Show me what you have. For the next hour, they sat in her office as James laid out his evidence. Classified weapons systems sold to hostile nations. Government officials paid to look away. Another network, smaller than the one she'd exposed but just as dangerous. Will you help me? James asked. Grace thought of her quiet life, her successful business, her hard-won peace. She could say no, direct him to others. She'd done her part. But then she thought of Vincent Torino, murdered for standing up. Of Pete Walsh, who'd preserved truth for decades. Of Tyler, who'd grown up watching his mother choose integrity over comfort. Yes, she said. I'll help. That evening, Grace called Director Collins. The Anti-Corruption Division took James's evidence seriously, launching an immediate investigation. Within weeks, another network began unraveling. Tyler, now working at the Justice Department while studying for the bar, joined the investigative team. Like mother, like son, Collins commented, watching Tyler methodically build cases against the conspirators. The Blue Moon Diner had become more than a restaurant or museum, it was a beacon for whistleblowers. People came from across the country, sometimes the world, carrying evidence of corruption. Grace had hired former FBI agents to help evaluate claims, lawyers to protect whistleblowers, and counselors to support those whose lives were upended by choosing truth. Rebecca managed the foundation they'd established with the whistleblower rewards. It provided legal support, safe housing, and job training for those who'd lost everything by speaking out. David ran educational programs, teaching students and officials about the cost of corruption. Even Patricia, now 80, contributed by counseling family members of whistleblowers. I know what it's like to be blinded by comfort, she'd tell them. To choose security over integrity. Don't make my mistakes. One evening, as Grace closed the diner, Tyler brought news. Dad's being released next month. Good behavior, cooperation with authorities. He wants to know if he can write to me. Grace felt the old pain, tempered by time. That's your decision. I think I want to see him. Not forgive, not yet. But maybe understand. Whatever you decide, I support you. As they locked up, Tyler asked, do you regret any of it? Choosing the diner over the money. Grace looked at the building that had changed everything, her life, her family, American history. In its windows, she saw reflections of the past, herself as an exhausted waitress, Pete's proud smile, Vincent's hidden evidence, Tyler growing from frightened boy to principled man. Never, she said. Not for a second. A car pulled up, another whistleblower, another secret, another chance to choose truth over comfort. Grace Mitchell, once mocked for inheriting a worthless diner, walked back inside to hear their story. The Blue Moon never closed for those seeking justice. And neither did she. In the basement where $180 million in gold and evidence once hid, new secrets found safety. In the booth where Grace first discovered Vincent's journal, whistleblowers found courage. In the diner everyone said she was foolish to keep, truth found its home. The sign outside blazed against the night, Blue Moon Diner, where heroes are made, one choice at a time. Grace smiled, poured fresh coffee, and prepared to listen to another story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Just as Pete would have wanted.